Well, good morning, nerds. It is Sunday, 8 a.m. And if you're joining us live, you must really love policy and politics. I've got Max Steiner on the show, who I discovered. I think saw you first on my nonprofit of the people.us, and people were approval voting you. And I was like, oh, who's this guy? And then I looked at your district and I was like, whoa, that's a very different political kind of demographic than other parts of California. And I was like, wow, it'd be interesting to get Max on the show and hear, how do you run as a Democrat in a district that went pretty heavily for Trump? And so I thought we'd have you on the show. So welcome to the show and hello, nerds.
Yeah, hello, nerds. Yeah, I am Max Steiner. I am the Democratic candidate in CD1. So CD1 is the northeast corner of the state, so it goes from just north of Sacramento all the way to the Oregon border, um, without touching the coast. So we are basically the size of West Virginia in terms of land area,
Mm.
and so that's the District 1. It's been consistently Republican since around the 80s. There's a big flip, and rural districts went from like kind of Democrat, kind of following the U.S. Southeast. So right, like Georgia
Mm-hmm.
used to be very blue, now it's very red. So the same thing basically happened in District 1. So it's a what most people consider a pretty safely Republican seat. It's got about a 12% advantage to Republicans on registration. So there's about 41, 42% Republicans that are registered, about 29% Democrats are registered, and about 30% are independent, right? So you need to win about 2/3 of the independents to win the election as a Democrat.
Yeah.
Um, if you're thinking like, oh, so how winnable is that? It's like it's on the edge of winnability, right? Like there are some districts that are just so blue or red. Doesn't matter how bad your candidate is, how bad the other candidate is, or how bad you are, or how good you are
Mm-hmm.
as a candidate. Um, but at that kind of level, at 12% or so, you could conceivably eke out a win. That's just less likely than something like a true swing district where the registration's within 5 percentage points.
So, Max, where does your story begin? Tell us a little bit of
Oh,
a background about you.
right. So I was born in Sacramento, graduated high school. I guess I will. This is a nerds podcast, so I will note that I was on the math team in high school, which
Well done.
was a part of my life. Right? Yeah, mathletes. I am athletic. I still have a shirt that says that. It doesn't fit me anymore because I've since bulked up considerably.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I joined the army after high school. It was the middle of Iraq. I was pretty patriotic at the time.
Mm.
Still am, but a little less idealistic now. But so I went from like a buck 40 entering basic, 5'9", 140 pounds, to like 170 pounds now. So nerds, if you want to bulk up, join the army, right? Like lots of benefits. But yeah, so I did that for 4 years, 3.5. Did 2 tours in Iraq. As I was getting out, I applied to and was accepted to Berkeley. And then I kind of did city college. So I got out like Christmas. So I applied the year before I was getting out, got out on Christmas. And then that spring and summer semester, I went to community college, and then transferred into Berkeley as a junior. So at Berkeley, I studied development studies. It's kind of like development economics. How do you make
Mm.
poor countries rich countries? So
Mm.
that's the shtick. My wife was studying something very similar, which is political economy. So I met her. So I got a BA and an MRS, both very good things to get at college. My wife's also smarter than me. Another excellent career choice on my part, or I guess just life choice. And so she's from San Francisco. So we were talking a little bit. So she's from SF, and then she moved to Millbrae. So after Berkeley, I joined the Foreign Service. So I've been a diplomat in Honduras, in Mexico, in Sinai Peninsula as a peacekeeper, and then ultimately in Washington D.C. So and then my wife at this point was working for a tech company, making twice my salary in the government. She was like, I don't really want to be a trailing spouse. So I really liked being a diplomat. I will be honest, but at some point, like you choose your wife. Like
Mm-hmm.
these tough choices, good choices to have, right? And so I got out. So I joined RAND. RAND is a think tank, a national defense think tank. So I was looking at kind of the intersection of defense and diplomacy issues in Europe and Asia. Um, and then January 6th. So that's kind of like my life, a long uh, biography. But January 6th happened, and I was like, oh my God, like this is nuts. And then my brother actually lives in District 1. He lives in Reading. He's lived there for 10 years. And he lost his house in a fire. So I already didn't like LaMalfa. And then LaMalfa voted against certification. And I was like, this is just nuts. So I reached out to the Democrats. I was wondering if someone was planning to run against him, and no one really was. There had been a very strong Democratic candidate who ran in 18 and 20. Her name was Audrey Denny. Great fundraiser, great campaigner, kind of came from an ag background, just not able to win. And so I reached out to her as well. Hey, are you going to run for a third time? No, was the response. So I, it's like, hey, like, I don't want this guy to coast to re-election.
Right.
And I think I can do a better job than you. And we never had a candidate that ran as a veteran, right? So in District 1 as a Democrat or as a Republican. I mean, Republicans love to talk about how pro-vet they are, but honestly, not many of them are veterans either. So I do think it's a problem, as an asterisk. It's not like I want to go full Starship Troopers, right? Where like only those who serve can vote or can serve in office. But I think it is important to have a mix, right? I think it's it's good to have veterans in Congress because much of what Congress does, some of the most important decisions Congress makes involve the military. And it's good to have a sense of perspective that isn't, I've watched a couple of Hollywood movies.
Right.
Or I've been taking on a couple of, PR junkets with national defense contractors. And they're like, hey, this one cool trick, terrorists hate it, right? Just give me $1 billion.
You're invincible.
So, yeah, exactly. Like, oh, have you watched Iron Man? What we do is basically Iron Man. And I'm like, oh my God, like this isn't going to work. Right. So, yeah. So, I thought I would do a better job. And I thought LaMalfa was wrong to vote against certification. So he broke his oath. I think he doesn't belong in Congress. I don't think any of the 137 people that voted against certification belong in Congress. I wish American voters across the country shared that view. But, so I ran against him. So, unfortunately, we don't have, like a way to say like, hey, your choice was so wrong. Like we'll have a primary challenge, right? So most of the big papers up here, I'll kind of talk about that. Most of the big papers up here, like the big three, they wrote a joint editorial saying, hey, Doug LaMalfa shouldn't run again. Either a Republican should challenge him or there should be, like another party. We should switch parties. So Doug did not take the hint, and none of the other Republicans took that hint either. We can talk about that later, but it is kind of nuts how much of a stranglehold Trump and Trumpism has over the modern GOP. And I don't think that's healthy. But so that was kind of like my path, right? So really mad about January 6th, decided to run, kind of reached out, did my homework. And then, because nerds, right? Like nerds like homework, right? And then, it's kind of, man, like you talk to a lot of people, you have to reach out to all the Democrats. I will say, like, the tension is that I'm a very moderate Democrat. So fair warning, all of you guys, District 1 is not Palo Alto. So if I'm running as a Democrat here, many of you guys are going to hear policy positions that will strike you as very Republican. But, like democracy or the Democratic Party right now is kind of defined by, are you pro-choice? And do you think that Trump belongs in jail? And my answers to both of those are yes. And that means that you're not a Republican, right? So yeah, you'll find that I'm a pretty moderate or centrist guy as this conversation evolves, and that took some winning over to get Democrats on the ground. Most been pretty understanding, like they know they live in District 1. It's very Republican space, but especially in Chico's very blue. That was a harder conversation because it's a college town. They want a Bernie Sanders guy. I will warn everyone. One of the most annoying phrases that I hear as a Democrat is like, Bernie Sanders won the primary election here. Like, if you ran like Bernie Sanders, you would do it. And Bernie Sanders got like 35% of the Democratic primary vote here. Like, that's not winning the primary election. That's like a subset of Democrats. And then it's only a minority. It's just the plurality of that subset. So to think that Bernie Sanders or a very progressive Democrat would win in CD1 based on the sole reference point of that Bernie Sanders placed first among Democratic primary candidates for president is a very strange piece of data analysis. But anyway, people believe that, right? So a lot of politics is just about beliefs and engaging respectfully and kind of softly explaining like how numbers work to some people. But it's really hard to tell someone who's dreaming of a very Bernie Sanders utopia to be like, well, he could win, sure, in other parts of the state, absolutely, but probably not in CD1, right?
Yeah.
So slow the roll there. But yeah, so that's kind of that's my shtick. Sorry, I hope I
Yeah.
didn't talk too long.
It's all good.
We can bounce into like the tough questions if you want.
Yeah, it's not a super tough question. It's just a follow-up question. So Vaughn in the chat was saying, "Hey, where did you go in Iraq?" He had, I would imagine he had
Oh,
served
right.
there.
So my first tour was Baghdad. So we were a light infantry unit. So I was 10th Mountain Division. And we first were in Sadr City, which is kind of like the northeast corner of Baghdad. It's a very Shia area, Muqtada al-Sadr. Probably should have killed that guy really early, but we didn't. Now he's kind of like still causing some problems with domestic Iraqi politics. He's actually a really interesting character, but we're not going to get into him. So anyway, so that was northeast Baghdad, and then we ended up on the west side of Baghdad. So we were at the Camp Victory complex, the big BIOP, Baghdad International Airport, and then we got farmed out to Abu Ghraib prison, actually. Although I will note that I never worked on the prison side. So as they were closing down the prison, Abu Ghraib was kind of in a rectangle, and the cantonment area for U.S. forces, they were drawing down numbers. So some spaces opened up, and our sector was the western side of Baghdad. So they were like, oh, well, this is closer to where we have patrol. We'll just move out there. So we lived in the U.S. part of Abu Ghraib prison. There were still some prisoners there. They had some riots while we were there. That was really interesting. You just all get spun up, like, hey, everybody put on your kit. Prisoners are rioting, but we never actually did anything on the prison grounds. We didn't pull guard. We didn't guard prisoners. We didn't see prisoners. We could just hear them like over the walls. And then we would just leave. So we'd use their dining facility, their showers and stuff, and then we'd patrol out using Abu Ghraib as a base. So that was first tour, kind of Baghdad from east to west. And then my second tour, I was up in Kirkuk. So Kirkuk is in northern Iraq, kind of the line between Sunni and Kurds and Turkoman. So there are still some Turkic, like descendants of the Ottoman Empire middle class, right? So up there. So we were up there first on Camp Victory, right? Well, Warrior. So Warrior was the air base, the main base in Kirkuk. And then we did a couple of small bases fobbed off that. So just kind of infantry stuff, you're spending some time on a big base, great amenities, got a pool, girls. And then, most of your time you're on like a 155, 200 person fob. You're pulling tower guard shift and, there's like nothing to do. You're burning your own shit, right? So, yeah, burn pits. I have a lot of experience with burn pits because you were on the rotation. Every team would pull burn pits every once in a while. So, so I don't know if that answered his question.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good tour of some of the places that you were at. Yeah, I would imagine. What was your reaction when you heard the Republicans say, "Hey, we can't support this anymore because it's all changed. It's completely different than what we voted for, and it's been a big Democratic scam to stick, unrelated."
You're talking about
spending.
the PACT Act?
Yeah,
the burn pit legislation. Yeah, no, it's just a betrayal. Listen, I mean, I'm a Democratic politician, right? Like, so don't just take my word for it. But, it's very obvious to me that Republicans claim they love the flag and do not. And that similarly, Republicans claim they love the military and do not. Right? I mean, so the guy that I'm running against voted against the PACT Act in the House, obviously, where the Democrats just won. But it makes it clear that if the Republicans controlled the House, or if they win the House in 2022, no legislation that's good for anyone, not even veterans, will pass the House because Republicans have become the party of no. Right? Doug LaMalfa, the guy I'm running against, he gets a giant ag check. He's one of the most subsidized members of Congress. $300,000, $500,000 a year in rice subsidies. And then he discovers like, oh, actually, I'm a fiscal conservative. Like I'm really concerned about this debt. I'm really concerned about this government spending because I'm spending it on military guys who have served their country and come back damaged. So the VA, Veterans Affairs, they have a long history of kind of underdiagnosing problems that are hard to see. Right? It's very easy to see like, oh, you've been shot and you've lost an arm or a leg or eyesight. It's harder to tell with some of these kind of, you have a, 0.2%, which is actually very large, higher propensity for rare cancers, right? So like that's just it's hard statistically to make that determination to tie that cancer to your military service. But we've seen it, right? We saw it in the Vietnam War, right? Agent Orange led to much higher rates of these rare cancers and rare diseases than in the civilian population, or even in the military population that was not exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam. We've seen it again in Gulf War. So Gulf War syndrome, exposure to uranium, exposure to a kind of a nerve gas sarin after they exploded some Iraqi chemical weapon stockpiles. And we are seeing it again now in Iraq, right? So, and these are long duration things, right? Like 15 years to see effects, because when you're 21, you can inhale some really nasty stuff and it's not going to show up until you're 40, until you're 50, and then it starts to wear on you. So the PACT Act was named after a guy, I think he was 37, 38, basically my age. And, he was exposed 15 years ago. Then he got a rare cancer. And now I think he's got like a couple months to live. But it's really sad. And I understand that it's hard for the VA to make that determination, right? It's hard as a doctor to say, like, I could definitively tie the fact that you were in Iraq 15 years ago and exposed to these burn pits to your cancers now. But statistically, it's very easy, right? And this bill basically said, like, well, we're going to make this money available because there's obviously a statistically significant effect, even if you can't tie an individual case, A to B. And the Republicans voted against it. And I think that's really a shame. It's really indefensible, right? Like, I understand that I took a risk when I went to the Army. Like, I'm not expecting to get bailed out of everything. But like, the military broke these people, and I don't have any health issues, not yet, knock on wood. But the military, asked us to do crazy stuff, and it's not like we had the ability to say, like, nah, this feels unsafe. So there's kind of a responsibility. If you break it, you buy it, and that includes soldiers and veterans. So yeah, that's a very long answer to say, like, yeah, Doug voted against the PACT Act. Those Republicans that voted against the PACT Act should be ashamed of themselves. And it's time for veterans and soldiers to understand that the Democrats are truly the party that cares about them and not the Republican Party anymore.
It's so amazing how the power, I think, of this like cultural tribalism seems to just override like the clear facts on the ground, which are that the party, this kind of new Republican ultra MAGA flavored party, they're always showing off the flag and chanting USA and all this stuff. But then when it comes to stuff like the PACT Act, that should be like a no-brainer.
Right.
If you're all about America and a strong military, and it's the Democrats that have to kind of, take care of the people that serve. Like, that's just nuts. I just don't.
For the
I don't
Republicans
understand that,
who passed like a giant tax cut, who consistently give out massive agricultural aid policies to Republican farmers, to finally discover that, like, oh, actually, I'm really concerned about the deficit when it comes to veterans. It's just hypocrisy.
Yeah. I mean, it does make a little bit of sense with Trump, because I know in the past he said, been multiple reports where he said to his team, like, why do people serve? Like, if you're really smart, why would you go into the military? Like, I don't think he really respects the military. I know he likes to, pose in front of them.
Right. He sees the military as a prop. And it is, I'm still in the reserves. So I'm a first sergeant there in reserves. I drill 1 weekend a month. There are a lot of guys in my unit who really like Trump. It's for those cultural reasons, right?
Yeah.
He's kind of a brash and aggressive guy.
Yeah.
And Democrats often come across as, nerdy, but overly intellectual. Maybe it's a nicer way to say that. And there is like this cultural response to be like, yeah, Trump's a bully. And he's strong,
Yeah.
But it's important to be able to step back, right? And say, like, let's evaluate this on, like, not what he says, but what he does.
Yeah.
And when you start evaluating the parties on what they do, it's very clear that the GOP treats the military as a prop, like in actuality. And the Democrats treat the military as a tool that can be used carefully to expand national power. And they don't always use it correctly, right? Plenty of military failures, but they do treat it with respect, not just willy-nilly sending soldiers out or saying, like, oh, we're just going to, do XYZ and not pay for it. So that's why I'm a Democrat, right?
Yeah.
Because also, I will note, just because we're on the topic, it's really funny to talk to soldiers who are like, I hate socialism. It's like, guys, like, we get free healthcare, like all our meals are paid for, like all the barracks are here.
Hmm.
It's just like this kind of lack of like, hey, be able to step back and like evaluate, like, what do you think socialism is? I will say, like there are a lot of things about the army that could be improved. Um, so you do also learn, like, oh, this may be why capitalism works better, right? Like dealing with some parts of the military, and you're like, yeah, that's
Mm.
why this is why socialism doesn't work. Just too big of a bureaucracy. The pricing mechanism is actually a really good mechanism at sometimes. So uh, the military kind of gave me an appreciation for the good and bad of a large bureaucratic entity.
Yeah. 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 I'm sure not every 99 cents of every dollar is spent as efficiently as it could be. That I'm sure
Yeah,
of
I
that.
think if we got 99 cents out of the military budget, we'd be sitting pretty. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me a little bit about your first encounters in Iraq, because I remember uh I at that time, that was a long time ago, but I was a Republican. I've since since 2008 have switched over. But at that time, I really did believe I was very persuaded by Colin Powell testifying in front of the UN. And I thought George W. was he may not have been the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I felt like he was an honest guy. And when they said this place is brimming with weapons of mass destruction, and Saddam's going to do some crazy stuff, we need to preempt it, especially after 9/11. I was like, okay, this, I'm not a big pro war guy, but like we have, this seems like a mounting threat to the world and to the country. How long did it take for when you got there for you to figure out like, this is not necessarily what we thought we were getting into?
Yeah, so I will say that by the time I joined, which was 2005, it was pretty clear that the WMD story had been wrong.
Mm,
Right? And I will, not to make excuses. One, Colin Powell, great. We can talk about him later on the foreign service side. He's like the most popular Secretary of State ever. For the
mm,
short story of that, like he came into the department and was like, "I'm going to fix this department and like turn it, like professionalize it and like
mm,
treat it as like a big department that has manpower flows, and we're going to have training and kind of slot people."
mm,
Whereas most secretaries of state, like Clinton or Kerry, and I've worked under a few, come into the department are like, I'm going to use this as a tool to get elected president, right? And that was
mm,
not Powell. So it's surprising, even, like when I joined the Foreign Service in 2012, 11, 12, so almost 10 years after Powell, everyone that had served under Powell was like, Powell was the best Secretary of State we've ever had.
mm.
He was really good. It really sucks that he was wrong about the WMD thing. So that's from a lot of Democrats, right? The Department of State definitely tilts left in
Mhm.
terms of like who joins it, right? Who stays in it. So, so I will say that. So that's the first caveat. The second thing is, so right, it's like the real answer is that I knew that the WMD story had been wrong. I think at this point it's pretty clear that it was a case of wishful thinking, right? So everyone in the administration kind of wanted a war with Iraq. They wanted to believe that there were still weapons of mass destruction. So all the intelligence community was only feeding this information that already matched that. So we had this
Mhm.
giant bureaucratic case of confirmation bias,
Mhm.
and that's really dangerous. I think there was a similar kind of disaster of confirmation bias in the Afghanistan pullout, where everyone thought that Afghanistan would be fine for at least a certain amount of time, and so they kind of ignored information that didn't match that and
Mhm.
highlighted information that did. Uh, but yeah, I mean, like, there's a difference between saying like we completely made it up and that they didn't. Um, there'll probably be a book that comes out. I don't know, what would it be? 25 years to classification. So in another 15 years,
Mhm.
and then we'll get a firm answer. But I'd be shocked if Bush or Cheney were like, I don't care what the facts say. I want there to be WMDs. I think it's more likely that they were just cherry picking information subconsciously that matched their priors.
Yeah.
That is a big danger. Obviously, people like to think that these kinds of confirmation biases and, um, like intellectual errors, right, only happen in small groups, but they can happen in big groups too. And there's no bigger group than the U.S. government or the interagency. Um, so because politics is hard, right? Governing is hard. Information is always imperfect, and especially true when it comes to intelligence. But yeah, I mean, for me, I didn't join because I thought we were going to do a preemptive war. I did support the Iraq War for most of the reasons you mentioned. By the time I joined, it was like, hey, we broke it and we need to fix it.
Yeah.
Like, this is the defining conflict of my generation. The military, 2005, was really short on recruits, and I was like, I can do a good job there. And I was like, I'm in college at the time. I was at a year at GW in Washington D.C., and I was like, I can take 3 years, 2 years to go and serve, and then come back and live the rest of my life. So that's what I did. Right. I just thought it was important for, and I don't want to turn this into a recruiting call, but I kind of will. It's important for Americans to understand that, like, part of national service is also serving your country at wartime, right? So if you're 20 to 25 during a war, like, you should really consider serving, right? Or at least that's my personal belief, and so that's what I did.
Well, thank you for your service and willingness to serve the country, especially when at that point you knew you were getting into a mess. It wasn't like, oh, I think they're going to greet us with flowers and candy. Like, you knew.
Right.
We were
Yeah.
past that stage.
I mean, it was a disaster. I mean, by 2005, it was very clear that we had broken Iraq and Afghanistan. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I did join with eyes wide open. I was a little more idealistic about the end result, right? And after a couple tours there, I was like, oh, it doesn't matter. I never served in Afghanistan, but after a couple tours in Iraq, it's like, it doesn't matter how long we're here. If we keep intervening like this is going to fall apart as a democracy as soon as we leave. And it roughly did, right? Not to the extent of Afghanistan, but definitely the end result in Iraq was not what we wanted when we went in 2003, and it was not what we wanted when we were making these grandiose transition plans in 2008, 2009.
I'm curious what you thought of the Afghanistan pullout, in that a big part of the narrative was that Trump had basically laid the groundwork for a very smooth, peaceful transition, and then Biden just completely screwed it up the moment he walked into the Oval.
Yeah, so let me make this very clear. Trump broke Afghanistan, and his peace treaty was a complete giveaway to the Taliban. So Trump deserves much of the blame for Afghanistan. I would say that they're both equally to blame for that disaster. I mean, Trump was like, hey, we're going to pull out all troops. There's actually a really good quip of this far right news channel. It's probably OAN or Newsmax, having an interview with John Bolton and basically asking your question, but on a much more biased way. And John Bolton's like, no, that's crazy. Trump's peace treaty was a ridiculous joke. And they're like, no, it was good. It was good that he was going to leave some forces there. And he was like, no, that's not in the treaty, right? Trump's treaty was complete withdrawal of all forces. It was basically a green light to the Taliban to not attack us while Trump was in office, then to attack as soon as we left in the summer. So that's Trump. Trump, bad treaty signing. Trump deserves a lot of blame. I will also say, though, that Biden really messed up, right? Like, our withdrawal from Afghanistan was a disaster, and that is the responsibility of the president. He was obviously very misinformed. I think it's very bad that Biden is he's not a veteran. He didn't understand what he was hearing from his generals, and everyone had an incentive to kind of play it as like, oh, it's going fine, it's going fine. No one likes to tell the big boss that the thing they've been working on for 20 years and have spent billions of dollars on is actually a disaster. So, but they didn't, and Biden didn't ask the right questions. And then Biden was stubborn enough to say, like, no, we're going to pull out in this way. Like, we're going to close down Bagram Airfield before Kabul. We're not going to have a backup plan in case things go crazy. We're not going to have any contingencies in case the government just completely collapses. And obviously it did. So I wrote a letter afterwards saying that Biden should have, fired the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and the head of the NSA, and the head of Central Command, just for their failings, right? And he did not. And I stand by that assertion. I think Secretary of Defense Austin should have been fired, and everyone else that I named in the government, right? You need to fire the top echelon of, you don't resign. Republicans like Biden should resign after Afghanistan. It's like, shut up. No one called for FDR to resign after Pearl Harbor, but FDR fired a lot of admirals. He fired a lot of generals after we entered World War II. And that's what needs to happen when you have a military disaster, right? It's like either those military people lied to the president or they didn't know what was happening. And either way, you need to demand accountability because otherwise there's no feedback, right? If you are just rewarded, if you just get to keep your job, if you just kind of tell the president what he wants to hear and then it doesn't happen, but whatever, you still keep your job, then the only risk of losing your job is if you tell the president the truth. And that's a very dangerous kind of, structure to have in a bureaucracy. So generally, when something goes wrong that the government is touching, people should be fired. And Biden has been completely unwilling to fire people. So there's, a lot of blame to go around. One, Trump should be blamed for a really bad agreement. Two, Biden should be, these generals and everyone that was involved in the Afghanistan pullout planning did a very poor job, and they should have been fired. And three, and this is maybe worse, a lot of Afghanis suffered because of our incompetence as a government. And that's something that's going to be a moral stain on U.S. history, that our kids and grandkids are going to be learning about.
Yeah, we definitely don't have a great track record, at least in my adult life, of occupying and making countries better after we've left. They seem to get gotten worse.
What's the last win was Korea, right? And so that was 70 years ago.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about CA-1. I mean, you're running for office there. You definitely don't come across as a super squad-like Democrat.
No, yeah. I definitely don't.
And so, if I squinted, you definitely kind of sort of a centrist. I mean, in the old days, you might have been a progressive Republican in some ways. Kind of like a Rockefeller Republican or a, Northeast Republican type vibe, which I used to be part of before the Republican Party kind of transformed into something else. Tell me about what it's like talking to constituents or prospective constituents in your district, because it does seem like Trump's lock on the party is very strong. And you're in a very plus 12 or plus something, double digit Republican district. Are you able to break through? What's that like when you talk to people over there?
I mean, there's some people you're not breaking through to, right? That are just like, you're a baby killer, right? Or you're not baby killer. That's what liberals say to me in Berkeley. But no, you get people that are like, oh, the Democrats, they hate America. You want to destroy our country. You drain adrenochrome out of babies. It's wild. You meet some really wild people up in the North State where it's like, you need to change your source of information, my friend. Turns out that this far right Telegram channel that you obviously spend hours on a day is not actually informing you. So that's problematic. But that's a lot of Republicans up here, definitely. But it's not everyone, right? There are a lot of Republicans who can look at their party and be like, ooh, this isn't what I wanted, right? There's 30-50% of the Republican Party up here that doesn't really like Trump that much. Definitely, I've talked to a lot of Republicans who are like, I just hope Trump doesn't run again. He was too much of a distraction, right? Some are really into Trump. So it's important not to treat the GOP as a monolith, and that to understand that there is a large part of the GOP that I'm just not going to get to vote for me because they're convinced that, the Democrats are a threat to the United States. And once you get someone afraid of a group like this irrational fear and it's taken hold and they kind of fear turns state, then they're not really voters anymore, right? They're just ideologues. You can talk to them as long as you want, but they're going to say some crazy stuff like, oh, you just need to watch 20,000 Mules and then you'll understand. The movie made by Dinesh D'Souza, who was literally convicted of campaign fraud, and it's just complete propaganda. It's nothing, but once someone believes something like 20,000 Mules, basically a lost cause, right? Time is an important resource for a politician. And at that point, you just need to say listen, I'm sorry, sir. We obviously have a very different perception of reality. And I live in the real world and you live in this right-wing fantasy. And, I wish you the best of luck. And if elected, I would really try to help you on on real issues. But right now, you just need to snap out of it, man. So there's that. And you just kind of send them nicely on their way. I will say that it is nice to be a veteran because everyone loves veterans, right?
Mhm.
So like even the farthest right GOP guy, if he's a veteran and I'm a veteran, we will talk about the Army, and then we won't. It will be like, okay, like we've established this rapport. This is probably something else that's really good about having more veterans in Congress. And there was a generation that all served together in World War II, and if you didn't serve, like you had a brother or a friend that served, so there was kind of this shared experience. And there's something very valuable about having a shared experience when you're talking to someone. So either you're from the same place, almost impossible in CD1, right? District the size of West Virginia, or you've done something similar. So
Mhm.
whenever I talk to a veteran or a person who's had a son in the military or a brother in the military, like we can speak a similar language, get to a point of respect, and then talk about like where we differ, because everyone differs too. So those are probably the best conversations, right? So there's like three categories of people. People that are just never going to vote for me. They're really far right. They're really into Trump land. They can't even understand like how I can see Trump as a bad person, because to them, he's their messiah. So
Mhm.
it's unfortunate, but it's true. That is a lot of America right now. The second group are people that have this military experience or are military adjacent, and we can talk a common language, and then like from there, you build this foundation, and then you talk about other stuff. And then the third group are those Republicans who don't like Trump, right? The Liz Cheneys of the North State. Um, and so they're looking at the modern Republican Party, and they're going like, this is crazy. I'm
Mm.
not sure if you followed Shasta County, which is in my district, had a recall of kind of a moderate Republican county supervisor. So there's this big fight in Shasta County between the moderate Republicans, think your key clubs, the Chamber of Commerce
Mhm.
guys, and the far right,
Right.
the militiamen, the really Trumpist right, populist right. And they don't get along at all. So when you talk to moderate Republicans up there, they know the stakes. Like this is a far right faction of the Republican Party that is not interested in governing, and they can see it because that far right faction, they had this recall in February. Their guy won, and then they came in and fired the public health officer for doing your job, right? For
Mm.
enforcing COVID mandates, for putting out COVID information. Not even at the level. I mean, it's not like they were arresting businesses or arresting people without masks or closing down businesses. No, they were just putting out information. But the far right is convinced that COVID is a hoax and that anyone in public health must be in on this hoax. So they fired her, right? I mean, like the county fired the public health officer in Shasta County. So look it up. It's crazy. And all the moderate Republicans are like, what are you doing? Like, this isn't how
Mm.
government works. So, I will say that, yeah. So just to emphasize, there are all these groups that are ready to maybe not re-register away from the Republican Party, but are definitely ready to vote for someone that isn't Doug LaMalfa. Because especially in Shasta County, Doug LaMalfa threw his hat in with the radical right. Um, Doug's a far right Republican. He loves this stuff. Option one is he loves this stuff. Option two is that he's just decided that it's the best way to get reelected. The second one's probably worse, right? Part of being a
Yeah.
politician is having the leadership to say like, oh yeah, this isn't right. So I don't believe this. Like I'm going to be a leader. But Doug's the
Mhm.
kind of guy that likes to lead from behind, is a phrase in the Army, right? Like find out where everyone wants to go and then pretend that you're the one leading the charge. But yeah, so these moderate Republicans are also another group that you can talk to and have like really good conversations about. Say like, oh yeah, like this is like what I would do policy wise, and this is why you shouldn't vote for Doug. And by the way, I'm a pretty conservative Democrat, so I'm not asking you to register Democrat, but maybe I can be your gateway Democrat for 2022. So yeah, so there is that. I was disappointed in the primary results. I was hoping there'd be a lot more moderate Republicans. But over the summer, gas prices were high. Um, we've made
Mhm.
more contacts, and then Trump is still under investigation over the summer, and Republicans have now thrown out Roe v. Wade. So there have been a lot of changes, and I think there are a lot of those kind of, you were talking about Rockefeller Republicans, Eisenhower Republicans.
Mhm.
Um, they're getting really alienated from
Yeah.
what the GOP has become, especially in the North State.
Tell me a little bit about these independents. What are the policy topics that are most interesting to them? Because they're probably not interested in debating Jan 6 forever and 2,000 mules or whatever, 20,000 mules and
Yeah.
all this
So,
kind
I
of
mean,
crazy.
the independent streak in Northern California is mostly libertarian,
Hmm.
right? So it's like, hey, we want small government.
Right.
So very pro-gun. You know, like obviously there's variation within the group, but pretty pro-choice, um, and like kind of against like over-regulation from Sacramento. So they don't like government regulation. They don't like they like guns, and they prefer to keep all the freedoms that they have. So there's definitely been some feedback on the court decision in Roe v. Wade, which is good for me as a candidate. I am a pro-gun Democrat. I will warn you again that this is a different part of the state. Uh, but yeah, so being able to go, I'm going to a gun show on Saturday. I go to all the gun shows in my district, set up. They're like, oh man, a Democrat here. Oh, let's talk. Oh, you like AR-15s? I like AR-15s. Let's talk about it. Cool. Oh, you were in the military? Excellent. Let's talk about it. So it's excellent, right? So yeah, that's kind of like the independent group, right? And obviously there's exceptions, but in general, like independents are kind of, they're not super far right. Some are, far right Trumpers, and they think they're independents, and they're like, yeah, I'm an independent, but I really love Trump. It's like, all right, well, you're not really an independent then. But okay, but that's just how people are.
Yeah. What's your take on required gun training or gun education? Like obviously when you go to the military, they don't just hand you the
Right.
weapon,
Yeah,
you
I will
know.
say, I'm the top rated Democrat for the CRPA, which is the California Rifle Pistol Association, but I'm still a Democrat. So, and the NRA hasn't released those rankings yet. I bet I'm the top rated one when they come out. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, like, I'm fine with training. The Second Amendment is not some absolute thing. You get a gun, there's no background check, there's no training requirement.
Mhm.
You can buy whatever you want. Like, hey, yeah, there's going to be a limit on semi automatics. There's going to be probably a limit on the magazine size. You're going to have to get trained. You're going to have to get a background check. And we're going to have this rolling vetting so that if you do something wrong, we can take your guns away for a little bit of time until you prove to a judge that no, you can have a gun, right? So call them like gun violence restraining orders, right? So maybe if you go and I don't know, like someone calls in a complaint from your family and says like, hey, like, my 19-year-old son is acting crazy, and he's got
Mm.
3 AR-15s or a couple pistols, and I'm worried about him, and I want you to take his guns away while you send him to a psych check. Great, do it. I'd be very nervous if those gun holds went into like months before you
Mhm.
see a judge, right? Like you should see a judge within 2 or 4 weeks, right? Like say like, hey, we're gonna send you to a psych check, and then you're gonna get your gun back. You can go for a judge and convince them that no, I'm fine. I was having a bad day or bad week or something. So, because guns can kill people, right? But I will say that the liberal focus on banning certain types of hardware is one completely misplaced because AR-15s, there are millions of AR-15s in circulations. They really don't kill that many people. They're used in these, high volume attacks, but we've only had about 15 high volume attacks, like AR-15 mass casualty events, in the past 10 years. And then the second thing is like, so if you really wanted to regulate guns, you'd be regulating handguns, right? Just from a hardware perspective. And the second thing, and maybe the more important thing, is that this is a constitutional amendment, right? Like I consider constitutional amendments to be interpreted very broadly, and we should be very careful about infringing on them. So that's why I'm so pro-choice, right? Like I do believe we have a constitutional right to privacy, and from that derives, a right to reproductive privacy and a right to reproductive choice. Um, if you're just going to legislate away a right to a gun, without changing the Constitution because it is quote too difficult, but you're just going to change it de facto by making it too expensive, like the Newsom approach, where you're just going to sue anyone that sells a gun into oblivion, or the San Jose approach, where you're going to make everyone buy gun insurance, which is basically a way to say like only rich people will be able to afford the Second Amendment. I think that's very wrong. And so if Democrats were honest, and there are some, they're like, we have, been with the Constitution for 250 years. It's time to change the Second Amendment. Things have changed. That's fine. That's like a reasonable position, very defensible. I don't think you're going to get it passed, but it's very reasonable. When someone says like, I can't change the Constitution, I don't care what the Constitution says, I'm just going to change this because I know better. Well, that's not how our government works, and I really stand firmly against that. So there are a lot of California laws that I think do infringe on like parts of the Second Amendment that we should be very careful about restricting.
What does CA-1 think about climate change and
Yeah,
climate
so
regulation?
they
Yeah.
don't believe in it in general. They're like, oh, it's all
Mm.
man-made. But even us, like, we're starting to realize, like, you start talking to Republicans even, and you're like, okay, well, like, listen, sure, it's a natural cycle. Okay, it's still happening, right? Like, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, you're right. So, they really don't want to take you. They don't want you to take away their diesel trucks. Like at the end of the day, that's it. And it's also kind of become a cultural thing. Like only libs, only the libtards believe in climate change. It's like, oh my god! Like we had massive fires, we had this massive drought. Like there's not enough water for ag. Like everyone can see that the temperatures are different than they were 50 years ago. Um, so that's a really disappointing thing. But people are really able to stick their heads in their sand, and that's been true for many years, right? Steinbeck has a quote like, "Never tell a farmer it's not going to rain next year," and that's definitely still true. Everyone thinks that this is a temporary thing, and that anything we do about climate change right now is just wasting money. Um, Obviously, there's a lot of everyone on the left kind of realize that climate change is real, and there are a lot of people in the middle and even on the right that recognize that even if it's not man-made climate change, that climate change is real, and we're going to need to start addressing it. So I do believe in climate change. My opponent
Mhm.
does not. I think that the Republican media ecosystem has been very effective in convincing Republican viewers that climate change is some big hoax. But eventually, reality breaks through.
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic because I have as many of the viewers of this channel know, I have members of my family who are on the other side of the political aisle. And whenever we talk about climate change, they spend most of their energy trying to argue with me on who caused it. And I try to say, like, okay, let's just stipulate that man didn't cause it, but it's our problem.
Right. We do
So
live
what
here.
are we going to do going forward?
Yeah, that is actually probably the best way to talk because I'll often tell people like, hey, listen, I believe that man is having a role in it, and you don't,
Hmm.
and that's fine. But we both agree that we're gonna need to do something about it.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, yeah, I'm fine with that. So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
because there are very few people who are still thinking that the climate is not changing. Like it's obvious that the climate is changing. So instead it's become that, oh no, this is just a cycle. It's just a temporary thing. You know.
Hmm. Yeah. We got a question from the audience here from the live stream. Is it more effective to collaborate or compromise from a policy making standpoint? And that's from Jeremy Sammons, who's a channel member.
I mean, ideally, you always want to be collaborating, right? Because that allows you
Yeah.
to accomplish all of your objectives while other people are accomplishing objectives, right? So collaboration means like you have policy objectives A, B, and C, and someone else has X, Y, and Z, and maybe you can make a policy that accomplishes all six of those, right? Like that's collaboration, like win-win, right? Sometimes though, like your point B is the exact opposite of someone else's point Y, right? And
Hmm.
so then at that point, you will need to compromise, or you won't get the policy passed, or you just had the votes to push it through, right? Or they had the votes to push their side through. So usually, if you're making a choice between collaboration or compromise, it's more of a reflection of political power,
Hmm.
and are those points in disagreement? Um, I do think it's generally bad to push through an agreement without listening to anything of what your opponent has to say, even if you had the votes, because you might very well be able to pick out aspects of what they're saying that are good policy, or that at least don't conflict with what your preferred policy outcome is. Policy, like debates, like life, it benefits from different points of view. So, um,
What's an example of something if you were in Congress that you think you could work with the, you know, folks in the Republican Party or enough of them to come up with something that really is a win-win? Because in the old days, a lot of people said infrastructure generally like bipartisan issue. Supporting veterans generally used to be a bipartisan issue. But it's gotten to a point where it just seems like neither side wants the other side to get anything close to a win. And,
yeah,
we live to for the next election.
I think that's very true. Number two, I think there's a lot of room for improving our forest policy. That's kind of like the big policy position I have. And the pendulum, if you want to think about it kind of simplistically, the pendulum has swung far too far to the left, right? It's become very environmentalist, influence foreign policy. We have a law called NEPA that basically allows you to sue whenever there's a timber management plan. We're going to need to cut down a lot of trees in Northern California to drive down fire risk, right? Like the trees are too dense. 1900 U.S. Forest Service did surveys about 100 trees per acre. Now we're at 300, 400 trees per acre. This is kind of a legacy of clear cutting. Basically, when you clear cut a forest and they all grow back at the same time, they can overcrowd. But when you stop managing forests, as we did in the 80s and early 90s, because of really increased environmental regulations, you increase this debt, right? This debt of biomass, and now we're seeing it burn, right? So there's two factors leading to the massive fires in the North State. Number one is climate change; it's real, and number two is bad forest management. And there are a lot of very liberal groups, like environmental groups, that are like, I don't want to cut down any trees. Like trees are sacred. How dare you want to cut down a tree and make some money off of it? And that's the wrong approach. Like it doesn't work for District 1. It doesn't work for the state. It doesn't work for the trees. That's why you get these mega fires that'll just burn, reach canopy, and then go for, in the case of Dixie Fire, 1 million square acres, square miles. So, on the Republican side, I think that there are a lot, and I've talked to a lot, Republicans and moderate Republicans who would be like, yeah, I'm very interested in finding a moderate Democrat that can say, we're going to have to make these reforms to the NEPA regulation to make it easier to cut down trees in an environmentally sustainable manner. We don't want to go back to clear cutting, but we are going to need to remove the biomass in the forest because that's just one of the effects of climate change.
Well, Max, we're running short on time, so I wanted to start to kind of bring this to a summary around how you intend to win, because I did a little homework as well, just pulling up some numbers. I'll share it on Ballotpedia. I mean, this guy that you're running against, Doug LaMalfa, in the primary, he seems like he has a pretty strong base. In the primary, he already got more than half. What's your view on how to turn that tide in the general? Because I also was doing some research on the previous challenger to him from the Democratic Party in previous elections had raised a considerable amount of money, and like they tried really hard.
Yeah. Audrey Denny,
Yeah.
2.5 million in 2020.
Yeah.
And I've raised basically 500,000, so a fifth.
Yeah. So you're not going to have as much money. And I was hoping, I mean, this Doug guy has been in Congress for like a long time. So I was thinking, oh, maybe the people want change, they want fresh faces, but that 51% primary performance is pretty daunting.
Yeah, so it is, he actually did a little better. Those are kind of earlier numbers. But that's fine. It's not on Ballotpedia. You'd have to look up the Secretary of State site. But I will say, it's not that good of a vote for, a Republican district, right? Like he should be winning,
right, 60 or something,
60% of the vote. So there is an appetite for change. More importantly, there have been a lot of changes since June, right? So the big ones, Roe v. Wade. Actually, probably the biggest one is the gas prices have fallen $1.50. This is a very gas-dependent district. There are so many voters I talked to that were like, listen, I don't care, but my gas prices are up. I hate the Democrats. It's like, that's not the only thing that's important about policy, and also not that much to do with the president, but okay. And then, this Trump is still in the news. And there are a lot of moderate Republicans. They're like, oh my God. I think if Trump declares, who knows what's going to happen. But I think a lot of Republicans will just ditch the Republican Party if Trump declares for president before the congressional elections. I don't know if he will. Trump's kind of a wild card. But the more Trump is in the news, the worse it is for GOP candidates kind of up and down the board, because it drives down turnout for the moderates. And then we'll talk about that last bit. So turnout. So the primary election had terrible turnout. And in bad turnout, it tends to benefit Republicans. So we're looking at those numbers, and they're definitely not where we wanted them to be, right? I wanted to break 40%. But November's a different ballgame, right? It's been 6 months. Gas prices are lower. The Democrats are getting good legislation passed. The Republicans are in complete disarray. And then, they're kind of the case of the dog that caught the car on Roe v. Wade, which is a very unpopular thing, even for a lot of Republicans up in Northern California. So I do think this race is still in play. Obviously, money helps. I think there's probably pretty, strict decreasing marginal returns after about $1.5 million. So I'm not at that point. But Audrey Denny raised 1.2 million in 2018. She actually did better in 2018 than in 2020 when she raised 2.5 million.
Mm.
At some point, you're just spending too much money, right? Like there's the point of advertising is to either get someone to visit your website, or at least so that everyone knows your name before you're going into the ballot box and they know one or two things about you. Um, and you can kind of do that with 500,000. We're not going to buy TV ads, but we're getting out there. We're having town halls. We're getting as much free media as we can. Right, we're just getting coverage. So we're getting on TV, and yeah. So I'm obviously still fighting, and I'd love your viewers to donate, obviously. But it's a tough race. It is a stretch. I think it's just really important to make sure that Republicans can't coast to re-election, and that if someone like Doug does lose, I think it's a real stake through the heart of this Trumpist GOP. Because if you can't win as a Republican in a pretty conservative district like CD1, well, then no one's going to vote against her to find an election ever again.
Yeah, well, I hope you do really well and surprise a lot of people, Max, because I think it would be nice to see some centrist or conservative Democrats perform well to kind of highlight to the Democratic Party, like we need to have a more diverse approach
Right.
ourselves,
We are a big tent party,
Yeah.
and we're not all the squad and everyone else. There are leaders in the center that just kind of
Yeah.
disagree with what the squad wants to do from a policy perspective.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I mean, one of the things that I'm intrigued about with the Ford Party and kind of third party movements is where does someone go if they were not for defunding the police in 2020 and they're also not for defunding the FBI in 2022? Like,
Yeah.
what party do I belong to? It's like, I don't
And
know.
you should be voting for Max Steiner, who's a Democrat, right? That's my answer there. It's like we're going to fund the police and we're not going to blow up the FBI. So
Yeah.
that's my pitch.
Well, good luck to you, Max. I appreciate you stopping by and sharing your thoughts. I'll put a link to more information about you in the description below for those who are watching on replay. And if you like this guy, definitely like and share this stream and interview, and check out his website. Consider donating or volunteering. Be great to kind of get your voice in DC. And again, thank you for not only your service in the Army but also to the Foreign Service. So you've done a lot for the country already, and hopefully you'll be doing more in the future.
Well, Tom, thanks for having me on. I've kind of forgotten the catchphrase.
Oh, well, with that, we're
Goodbye,
going to say
nerds.
goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds. Good. I got it. So you're a
Love
guest.
it. Take care, buddy. See ya.
Have a good one.
All right. Max Steiner. Interesting guy. Tough district. Yeah. Tough district because he's a really compelling, basically moderate candidate. But I don't know if he's running in a moderate district. I think it will depend on how much drama Trump creates. Almost it's out of his hands. Like if Trump keeps pissing off independents as he has a habit of doing, because like whatever Trump does is not going to really change the MAGA people. It's not going to change the anti-Trump people. But for that slim kind of undecided group, if Trump creates a lot of drama, I think a lot of those independents are going to be like, God, I don't want this kind of cult of personality to persist any longer. And therefore, maybe I'll vote for Steiner instead of the LaMalfa guy, because LaMalfa is such a kind of, part of that red hat group. Maybe, if gas prices keep coming down, knock on wood, that would be nice. I didn't get a chance to talk to Max about how funny it is. I remember when gas prices were high, and they still are, but where they kept increasing, a lot of my MAGA family were like, look, this Biden has screwed up the gas prices. And I said, hey, it is a global commodities market, and we don't, it's not like there's some dial in the Oval Office that you decide what the prices are. And they're like, oh, he blocked the leases. And that's why I'm like, well, that supply takes a while to get produced and then refined and then get to the pump. Not to mention, like, Keystone is not some geyser of oil for the whole world. Probably would have just moved prices a couple percent. But now that the prices are coming down, I'm like, hey, look, the prices have come down. They're like, oh, you want to give credit to Biden for a global commodities market? You should thank Saudi Arabia. You should thank all the other places that are producing oil. And I'm like, okay, well, because 2 months ago you said he single-handedly raised all the prices, and now the prices are coming down. It's out of the president's control. So you really have to decide what laws of economics you want, at least for a whole year. You don't get to kind of pick month to month. But anyway, I digress. I wanted to stay on just for a few more minutes to thank the people who make this channel possible, as well as encourage you, if you like Max Steiner. Right now, he is listed on OTP, so on ofthepeople.us, which is kind of like a Yelp for political candidates. Nonprofit started by myself and a few other volunteers. Our top trending candidates, and this is based on most approval votes. So if you like any of these candidates, all you need to do is you go to the candidate, you click on their profile, and then you click on this approve button. And then if you do, it registers the vote, and then it moves them up in order. Max is still kind of like middle of the pack right now, but he's an interesting guy. So if you like him, go ahead and approval vote him. Our top trending candidates are David Kim, John Fetterman, and Jermaine Johnson, and they recently won our OTP donation contest. Oh, Lonnie Chen is over here. He was just on the show yesterday. So go to ofthepeople.us if you want to support and increase exposure for candidates like Max Steiner or Lonnie Chen or Jermaine Johnson, whoever, David Kim, whoever you like that you approve of. Just click on the approval vote. For Nerds for Humanity, those of you watching on YouTube, that you see there's a join link. Some people do click that link, and they help provide financial support for our podcast hosting fees, some of our software licensing fees, and it doesn't cover the total cost of all of the stuff we do for Nerds for Humanity, but it definitely helps. And I want to thank some of the people who do that right now. And we're going to give our first shout out to Soldier One. And Soldier One is a senior vice president. They've been supporting us for 28 months. They started out as a different level and then upgraded to SVP. So thank you, Soldier One. And then our VPs are Bike and Kristen Slevin. We'll sort by total time as a member. Kristen Slevin's been a member for 31 months and Bike for 21. And they're both key supporters of this channel, and they help us keep making content, as do our hardcore nerds. Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Robert, Dean, Statner, Galessa, Jay Perrin, AH, Dana, Jason, Parth, and Daniel. And StreamYard is our live streaming partner for this show. So thank you to StreamYard for your help for making this channel possible. And then our entry level, which if you're watching this and you're not a member, it's like $1.99 a month. So you probably wouldn't even notice it if you joined. But you'll get a shout out like this every show, or almost every show. Lisa, Albert, Brandon, Arez, Sophia, Doris, Emerald, Ben, Rasta, James, Emma, Hui, Elizabeth, Ira, Shoni, Jameson, Doctor, William, Karen, Ardent, Zemery, Mai, Brittany, Warren, Wana, Lucky, Kevin, Nell, Toby, and Jeremy. So, and our newest members. So if you join now, you're going to get an extra newest member shout out. Jeremy Salmons, Toby, and Nell. Ooh, love it. Those are our newest verified. Our newest overall are Jeremy, Toby, and Daniel. So that's it. I think we hit all of the topics I wanted to hit. Maybe I'll just show you some of the stuff I've been tweeting about, because Twitter's always interesting. It's kind of like a stream of consciousness for me. If you don't follow me on Twitter, it's at Nerds for Yang. What am I talking about on Twitter these days? Let's see. Here we go. So we have, of course, Max's live stream. This is me trying to draw a analogy about anybody who's listening to this who works at a corporation or at any kind of institution knows that when you leave that institution or that corporation and you're no longer working for them, you're really not allowed to take stuff from the office and put it in your house. Like, that's just like basics. And I said, like, look, if you don't take towels from a hotel after checking out, you shouldn't take boxes of top secret government documents from the White House, especially after you got fired. I mean, he basically got fired, right? He ran for re-election, and the people said they didn't want him again. He lost the popular vote in 2016, and then he lost it by even more in 2020. And like, them's the breaks, So, anyway, oh, wait a minute. Ethan is saying that he takes the towels. I think you're saying you take the towels from the hotel. You really should not do that. But if you ever become president, you definitely shouldn't take top secret documents. Then I was a little bit of tongue in cheek, or kind of, I do have a tendency sometimes in my weak moments to try and own the Moggins, saying, hey, Pence confirms he did not leave office with classified material. So I said, yeah, reminder, don't hang this guy. This guy is, he's I don't love Pence, but he doesn't steal top secret stuff. Let's see what else. One of the people on Twitter was, after I said the thing about the towels, he said, hey, I have a standing order spoken under my breath that when I use a towel anywhere once, it becomes my property. That was funny. This was quite sad. I don't know if you all saw this, but they have some of the documentation from Giuliani's attorneys to Trump and to Meadows, begging for Giuliani to be paid. And there was a quote saying, like, hey, Rudy needs to be paid for his services. As you know, he lost his job and income defending you during the Russian hoax investigation and then the impeachment pro bono. He's been working 24/7 as part of the Stop the Steal movement. Like, can he finally get paid for these invoices? And I don't know, man. I think it says a lot about someone if they don't pay their bills. But it says even more if they don't pay their bills to people who are who are your biggest supporters and defenders. And I mean, say what you want about Giuliani, the guy definitely bent over backwards for Trump. And it's just so weird that he doesn't, like, why doesn't Trump pay people? If he's worth all these billions, like, just pay your vendors, man. Yeah, so I said, like, if this is how you treat your friends, like, Jesus. Then I had a poll around, hey, new features to OTP, and I'll put it in the live chat now if you guys want to vote. Oh, Caleb is saying, did I already discuss the Acosta interview? I didn't. I might do a separate live stream on that. It depends. Maybe later today. Who knows? Maybe right after this. Depends on my energy level. But I'll tell you what, if you all, if 3 people tweet at me saying, Tom, do a live stream about the Acosta interview, like, I'll do it today. So on Twitter, I'm at Nerds for Yang, or you could put in the comments on this live stream, just say, hey, we want to nerds reacts to the Acosta Yang interview or play by play, I'm happy to do it. I'm just not sure if people still are interested since it's kind of last week's information, but happy to if you want that content. And if you remember and you ask for it, then for sure I'll do it. But on the OTP survey, I was saying, hey, it's an all volunteer effort. What do people want? And it was interesting. It's only 9 votes, so definitely vote your voice. But some people are saying they want supporter testimonials more so than some other features like search by tag or C matches based on me. I thought would be kind of cool where you on ofthepeople.us as a supporter, you say these are the policy issues that are important to me. This is my zip code. Show me the candidates that are the best match for me. Um, Ethan, Ethan is saying to the Acosta interview, I demand it. All right. Well, let's see. That's Caleb now and Ethan, but we did say we needed 3 people to ask for it, so we'll wait and I might just do it anyway, but it's just a question of whether I'll have time to do it today. So I think, yeah, I don't want to go through my entire Twitter feed. Let me see if there's any of the other interesting stuff. Oh, let's end on this note. I was like, hey, I want to have a little cleanse on my Twitter feed and not talk about Trump or Biden or Yang for a minute. So I said, what's a dog breed that you don't own, but you have to pet them or snap a pic if you encounter them in public? So for those of you who don't know, I'm pretty sure I have the world's best yellow lab. Like she is the best dog ever that I ever had in my life. I tell my kids, like, you will never have a dog like this for the rest of your life. But, there are certain dogs when you see them on the street or, at work or, in a public place, you're like, oh, look, it's a blank. Let's go pet that dog or let's stay on that dog. And for me, it's the corgi. Especially not the orange ones, but the dark brown and white ones. I think they're just so cute and they're so spunky and they they seem smart but friendly and they're kind of compact without being like purse dogs. I love corgis. Someday I'll get one, but I've got my hands full with the lab and the 2 boys right now. Then someone was saying, what is this animal? Is that like a it's not a husky or samoyed, but looks like some kind of sled pulling dog. So Rochambeau was saying people love her dog. That's a dog lover. When you ask them, hey, what dog other than the one you own do you love? And then the dog lover says, look at my dog. No judgment, Rochambeau. It's a beautiful dog. Those eyes are piercing. Elizabeth has a weakness for the big droopy-eared hound dogs, probably like a basset hound, I would imagine. Yeah. I used to love basset hounds and would want them, but I heard they're kind of a little stinky, maybe the folds or something. Annette used to have a pug, so yeah, whenever you see something that reminds you of someone that you used to have, yeah, I got it. And then the English yellow lab, that kind of like boxy face. Then we've got the boys. Those 2 are pretty precious, I admit. That's like a Jack Russell. I'll never forget. Crimson Tide had a very important Jack Russell character. Dachshunds from Valerie. And then this, whatever, Pete is that meme dog. I don't even know. I think some kind of Japanese breed. But yeah, they're definitely, that breed has definitely gotten a lot of attention lately. All right. Ethan, when your dog has a British accent. Love it. All right, guys. I think we're going to wrap up for this stream. Maybe I'll see you again to do the Acosta thing because I think it would be kind of interesting because where I fall on that is I'm not a full-on defender of yang, but I'm also feel like Acosta did a pretty unfair job. I think they both, it wasn't either's best interview. Shiba Inu, yes, that is the name of it. Thank you, Ethan. You're very appreciate your help, guys. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, nerds, and hope to see you again soon. If you valued this live stream and this channel, do me a solid, become a member. If you can't do that, like and share. Probably share is higher than like. Yeah, share. If you can't share, then comment. If you can't comment, then like. If you can't like, then just have a great day. It's all good. Appreciate everything. Bye, nerds.